Welcome to Reinventors and the Reinvent America series, where this week we're going to be reinventing bipartisanship. I'm Pete Leiden. I'm the founder of Reinventors and the host of the Reinvent America series. Now, it's been only a month since we had the national elections in which we're supposed to sort out what the country is going to do for the next couple of years and get on with the business of governing. And the night of the election, there was a lot of lip service, you could say, to the people have spoken. They want us to work together, and we should work together and solve the challenges of our time. But it wasn't too many days later where it started to break down and go back into the kind of same way we've been doing things. I'm from both sides, actually. President Obama did a bunch of unilateral actions that warmed the hearts of progressives but antagonized conservatives, and also many House members conservative House members in the House also started talking about rolling back Obamacare and even talking about impeaching the president, some of it. So we kind of went back into the battle lines that are drawn. It wasn't an auspicious beginning, and it doesn't bode well for the next couple of years. There's a saying that many people have heard about Einstein saying the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different outcome. And so I think we're basically that can be applied here. It's not going to work if we just try to do the same thing. So it's time to kind of think about how would we more fundamentally reinvent bipartisanship. And it's not just how do you get elected officials to work together, because it's rooted in some very big divisions in the American public right now between progressive conservative, between Democrat, Republican, between red and blue America. This is something that we've got to figure out because it ain't going away in 2 years. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, and we've got to figure out how to work together in a much better way. Now, this is an issue that's really dear to the heart of our partners in this series, the Reinvent America series. It's Tech for America, or T4A.org. This is a group of entrepreneurs rooted in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, Seattle. They're the kind of can-do, get-stuff-done kind of entrepreneurs who really do want to find new ways forward and are really interested in finding ways to reach across the aisle and actually get stuff done. And we're really fortunate to help us drive this conversation to have Joan Blades, among others. But Joan is one of the leads here in this conversation. Joan is known to most people as the co-founder of Move On, which is clearly kind of defined as a progressive organization, and in fact, in some respects, very suspicious, let's just say, or if not demonized by folks on the other end of the political spectrum. But the interesting thing about Joan, besides having launched many other initiatives in her time, in 2011 she initiated this new organization called Living Room Conversations, co-founded it. And some of the folks involved in that are here on this roundtable. But it's an organization that's really trying to find ways to get Americans across the political divide to sit down in their living rooms and actually in small, intimate conversations really come to understand each other better and start to really heal the political divide and really get to the point where we can get stuff done. And she's going to talk a little bit about her experiences, and she's also helped us bring together a fantastic group here that have insights into how can we really heal this divide, how can we kind of reinvent bipartisanship. So I think to start off here, what we want to do is go around the table because we've got an awesome group here and they span the political spectrum. So we have a co-anchor here. Maybe we start with the introduction with the first one here, Jacob. If you want to go first and just give us a little bit about what you bring to the table, and we're going to have everyone here at least kind of plant themselves in the political spectrum before we go on to the discussion. Jacob?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a Mormon boy from Utah who fell in love with dialogue in graduate school and fell in love with liberals in graduate school, much to the chagrin of my community. I taught a liberal conservative dialogue class at the University of Illinois, and students told me it was the very first time they'd had a positive conversation about gay marriage. I wrote a book called You're Not as Crazy as I Thought, But You're Still Wrong, with an atheist Marxist friend from New York. And I'm just excited about the idea of treasonous friendships. I'm working with Joan right now in Living Room Conversations and really loving it. So.
Well, it's great to have you here. Thank you, Jacob. Jackie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, first I want to thank Joan for inviting me into this conversation, and you, Peter, for setting it up and moderating it. I'm Organizationally speaking, I'm the founder and president of an organization called independentvoting.org. We represent and work on behalf of the voting rights of independent voters, who are about 40% of the country today. These are Americans across the spectrum, really, who are so disillusioned and distressed about partisanship that they've actually identified themselves as political independents and are looking for a way to be a part of and participate in the political process. I have a long history of working across the political divide, including some political coalitions that have outraged people on the right and on the left. We can talk more about that as we get into the conversation. And I'm a very big believer in conversation and new kinds of conversations to bring people together.
Awesome. Great to have you here. Richard.
Well, thanks for having me here today. I'm really excited. My background is actually in theology and philosophy. I'm actually a minister, but I found an odd path into politics and have served as the adolescent health director for the state of Massachusetts, so on the public policy side, serving in government, and then started a group called Log Cabin Republicans in the early 90s to sort of bridge the gap between conservatives and gay folks. In the United States, I did that for 10 years and wrote a book called Party Crasher about my experiences doing that, building local chapters and trying to influence the Republican Party. And more recently, in the last decade, I've done a strategy company that works with social entrepreneurs to accomplish really major change in the world and help them find the investment they need through competitions and also navigate the politics that's necessary to actually change the world. And then work in Africa, Mexico. In all those places, I've worked on bipartisan solutions. So big projects that people said couldn't get done, but by bringing everybody together, we were able to accomplish a lot. And that would include issues like gay marriage, AIDS funding, AIDS in Africa, healthcare in Mexico, and college access in the United States for low-income students.
Awesome. Great to have you here. And Elisa.
Hi, so my name is Elisa Batista, and I'm the Associate Campaign Director for Moms Rising, or I should say, and Associate Campaign Director with Moms Rising. Basically, I work as an online and on-the-ground organizer for family issues, whether it's paid family leave or immigration reform that keeps families together, anything to help families raise their kids with dignity, and kids have a healthy start in life. So that's what I do. And thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be on this esteemed panel. I'm actually a little nervous.
Don't worry. Don't worry. You're doing great. Debilyn, do you want to go next?
I'd love to. So I'm Debilyn Molineaux. I am the president of Coffee Party USA. I work with Joan Blades at Living Room Conversations, and I also do some work in another field called transpartisan, which feels to me a little bit more inclusive than the bipartisan word that gets bandied about a lot, because I, like Jackie, I'm an independent, and every time somebody says bipartisan, then I feel left out, because I'm very fiscally conservative but very socially liberal, and there's just not a party that represents me yet. So I'm doing the work I can do to make our country a better place and really help us as we continue negotiating our new social contract.
Awesome. Great to have you here. Lawrence, why don't you go?
I'm Laurie Chickering. I have had an interest in this subject for my whole professional life. I worked for William Buckley in the 1960s, and I had the first inklings of this within weeks of working for him when I fell in with a group of black radicals in New York, intellectuals who were advising the leading radicals of the time, Stokely Carmichael and Rap Brown. And it became obvious very early in my conversation that their view of the race issue and the challenges of the deprived in the society were much more aligned with the conservatives at National Review than they were with the mainstream progressive thinking. And I spent the year bringing the two groups together, and it led me, it was clear that the groups had much more in common. It raised my awareness that this simple left-right spectrum hugely conceals complexities in the differences between the two camps that are really causing a lot of this conflict. That there is much more, there's substantial conflict within the left and within the right, and that if you look at it in the right way, an awful lot of the conflict is defined into the way we look at issues. That if you look at them differently, a lot of the so-called polarization of this intractable difference would disappear. And I've written 2 books about this. The first one, Beyond Left and Right, which is probably the only book anybody's likely to see, with a testimonial from Bill Buckley and from Tom Hayden on the same book. And then I did another one with a leftist, James Turner, Voice of the People, in 2008, which had a lot of testimonials from across the spectrum.
Awesome, great to see you here. We got quite a few people here have books out. Okay, before we jump to Joan, let me just say one thing. As awesome as this group is, no one's as smart as everybody as we think about it. And I know there's folks who are watching on our website, reinventors.net. You can watch it there. You can add comments there. You can also watch it in the G+ environment, which is really optimized for interaction. And you can actually add comments there and questions. And also through the hashtag Reinventors through Twitter. We have people watching that. We'll cycle it in, and if it's kind of in the flow of the conversation, we'll try to work it in as best can. We will certainly use it as we do our final package at the end of this roundtable in the next couple of days. So anyhow, why don't we go to Joan, who I've kind of introduced in general here. Joan, why don't you start to set the table, and then we'll go to your co-anchor, Jacob, after that. Go ahead.
Sounds good. So as a founder of Move On, that actually started in '98, midway in the impeachment scandal, and most people have forgotten that was a one-sentence petition. Congress must censure the president and move on to pressing issues facing the nation. And we had over 500,000 people sign it. And it was a unifying petition. You could hate Clinton or love Clinton and agree that the best thing for the country was to censure and move on. So my origins is actually trying to find common ground. Most people don't remember that about Move On. We had a delivery by Republican members to the GOP headquarters back in '98. But once we got involved in the electoral process, trying to elect people that better represented our values, elections are by their nature adversarial. And I've been getting my education about politics for the last 15 years or more, and I've seen that it's become so dysfunctional that we're unable to hear each other, that we're not going from adversarial to collaborative. And I truly believe that to solve the really big problems, we're going to have to be doing collaborative problem solving, because adversarial problem solving gives us substandard solutions, where we're in such a defensive crouch, we can't have the flexibility and the creativity to come up with great, better solutions. And healthcare is one of the best examples of that. We pay more than any other country in the world for our healthcare per capita, and we're not in the top 10 in terms of outcome. We're not in the top 20 for most outcomes, or even the top 30. If we were listening to each other and working together collaboratively, I believe we could have the best healthcare in the world at a lower cost. And when it comes to solving the really big problems, I believe that's what we have to do. I actually came to the concept of living room conversations through one, learning at Move On and Moms Rising that citizens are smart, they're caring, and that's actually true of most citizens across partisan lines. And when they sit down together for an intimate conversations, and the structure of a living room conversation is two friends with different viewpoints, each invite two friends for a structured conversation. Everyone's agreed to a set of guidelines about being respectful and taking turns and owning the conversation. And they're up on the website, just 6 simple, what you learned in kindergarten type conversation guidelines. And the structure, where the first couple questions are about why did you come, and then who are you? What are your hopes for your community? What are your fears? By the time that people in this atmosphere with friends and friends and friends have done those 2 rounds, they're listening to each other in a different way. They see that they do have many things in common, values in common. And they get to the issue, whatever that is, and they hear things differently. They want to be able to have everybody in the room be satisfied. And that's the objective of the living room conversations, is actually to let us listen to each other deeply, have a relationship. And what we've been learning is when people do this, we actually find some very important common ground. And that there's the opportunity then, when you need to actually go deeper, to get into deeper conversations that may be facilitated to really solve the problems. And I believe that holding the tension of our differences and really caring about each other, it is just possible we can have solutions that transcend what either group alone could do. And I do like the term transpartisan better than bipartisan, because it is so much more than a polarity. There's so many different types of conservatives and independents and progressives. It's not, we're incredibly diverse. And when we have that opportunity to not be living in, we have increasingly separate narratives, and our tribal barriers have gotten more and more rigid over the last number of years. I was able to have a conversation with leadership of the Christian Coalition back in 2004, and I realized in 2008 I couldn't have had that same conversation. That people had gotten stuck into their respective camps. The living room conversations are one tool among many tools to give citizens and leaders, if they choose, the power to start breaking down those barriers, because when we start connecting with each other, then we start having healthier communities and a much healthier democracy. So that's my basic story, and I have way more to say about this. But this group's so incredible, I want them talking about it.
And there'll be plenty more to talk about on this for sure. Well, Jacob, you're coming from a very different politics, but you've also been involved in this same effort. You want to give a little bit of your thoughts to start off, and then we'll go to the roundtable.
Sure. I first want to say amen, Sister Joan. I participated in my first living room conversation in New York with my atheist Marxist friend Phil, and I invited a Catholic and an evangelical pastor, and he invited 2 of his professor friends, and we talked about gay marriage for 3 hours. And I've never in all my life had a conversation like that. It almost felt like we were gathering together in this living room doing something rebellious. You know, we had food, we had bread, and we were actually getting together to do something radical, this radical act of really hearing each other out. So my big concern is that many people in my conservative community know a lot about liberals from Bill O'Reilly and Rush Limbaugh, and have virtually, very limited conversations with their actual progressive neighbors, and vice versa perhaps. And so it leads to this sense that I know who those people are. One of my students in the liberal conservative dialogue class said, you know, I don't need to ask them questions, I know how they think. And that sort of certainty, I really is kind of a collective delusion that we've downloaded from our media. And every time I actually sit down with somebody I disagree with and hear them out, I realize I don't know. And there's so much beauty and goodness and inspiration I found in sitting in a living room with someone else, or in going on a walk or a hike, and so it feels, that's where my hope comes from. I teach meditation for a living, mindfulness-based stress reduction. And we always tell our students, you have to practice. You have to actually do the work. This, to me, is akin to meditation. It's sitting in this space with people who are different and actually holding that tension. So, thank you.
Well, this is awesome. Thank you for the little setup, both of you. What I think you're implying there, Jake, which I'd like to kind of put to the table, is you're seeing it as what is the problem we're trying to solve for at some level. I'm interested in just what people see is, to you, it's kind of if we need to just get more exposure to each other, and media is kind of the problem, and we're getting this distorted world. Do others, just before we get into solutions, which is kind of the main theme of this, reinventors in this roundtable, like, what is the issue? Why is this such an issue now? What is at the core of the thing we need to solve here? That we, with an eye towards how we could solve it. And Richard, I thought maybe we'd jump to you, since actually you've had experience, kind of building off of Jacob's kind of experience. Maybe you've had some ideas of kind of what is the issue you're trying to solve coming from the direction you're coming from.
Thank you. I believe that the issue, from my perspective, is I'm part of an institute called the Institute for Cultural Evolution, and it's focused on how we can look at this culturally. And I think there's some real divides ideologically. They're very real. And I actually think that conversation is good, but I think if we don't look through the lens of where people are coming from, we're not going to move forward. So I would say that we have some very different worldviews in our country right now. We've got a traditional worldview that looks at the world one way, a very modern worldview that looks at the world in a completely different way, and we have a postmodern or a progressive worldview. And they're very, very different worldviews, and each have, as part of them, a shadow side, a fear side. They're afraid. The traditional culture is afraid that a world is moving beyond them, and something is changing, and they're going to lose their faith if they move into this new world that's coming, and they're afraid that we're going to that all the things that are true and pure to them are going to be lost. Then we have progressives who look at a world that say, hey, this is the time when we really can look at all the various oppressed groups of the world and make it right again for them, and these are all really fantastic perspectives, but they're completely, almost diametrically opposed. And so what I found, and so any kind of government reform, usually from the left on the right, is not going to work, and those strategies are going to fail. I think really understanding people where they're at and speaking to them in the language that works. In my experience, progressives kind of plant the flag of progress in the culture and say, let's move in this direction, and but very often turn back at those who are more traditional or conservative and sort of poke at them and say, you stupid, dumb, idiotic people, why aren't you following this? Which forces that group to lock in to what it knows. And I think the reason I've had successful strategies around a number of issues is starting with conservatives first and engaging them in the discussion in language that makes it safe for them to understand that this progress can be very much incorporate their morals and their values, but it's not undermining it. And that might sound strange for someone who, one of the most controversial issue of our time, which is gay marriage. But on that issue, interestingly enough, it was gay conservatives that launched that issue, and it was gay liberals who opposed it initially, interestingly enough. And I just found that the reason the gay left opposed it was using traditional language, the patriarchy, it was using conservative language. I think that's the reason why it succeeded too, because a lot of middle America could say, this is not a threat to me. These are values that I actually share. And so I think bringing everybody along as we move toward progress. So I'm all about progress and moving forward, but I think you have to take the group that's maybe the most traditional and focus there first. Most strategies start from the left and go to the right and don't work for that reason.
Really interesting insight, Richard. Debilyn, you had something to say on that. Yeah, you're muted out.
Okay. Sorry about that. Rich, I really love what you're talking about there and the setup that we have for all of this, because this is, I think, the essence of the social contract that I was referring to, that we are in these different narratives, we have these different worldviews, and yet there are still these people that are in power and that have power and that actually use the fear of those different worldviews to keep us separate for the sake of controlling the government, controlling the money. And so part of what we're doing with Coffee Party is helping, as Jacob was describing, with processes like living room conversations, help people find each other, find their way back to each other, where we have that common language, that common sense of and experience of each other, because it is through that developing the common language that I think we're going to find our way forward. And I love your idea of starting with the conservative framework. Reminds me of a friend of mine who used to say, 80% of what we have is actually pretty good, and we need to work on the 20%. We just keep fighting about which 20% it is. And so it's following the 80-20 rule. But I really appreciate what you said, and it is the fear base that keeps us separate, and looking at the people who control that fear.
Great, Elisa.
Yes, I have to say that I have a fundamental disagreement that we are born with these ideological differences. I really believe in this country, and I'm saying this as the daughter of immigrants who grew up in an urban setting with largely black and brown people, and then in high school moved to an all-white setting in New Hampshire. I got to tell you, we are very isolated in the United States. Most likely in African American communities, you don't have white people living there. In Caucasian communities, you don't have people of color living there. And let's be frank, is that number one, we are all American. That's something that I had to educate a lot of people about when I moved to my all-white suburban. American doesn't equal white. That's number one. Number two, every community, every American community has needs, different needs. And so it's a matter of us somehow getting exposure, coming together to talk, to be frank about what those different needs are and still recognize them as American needs. But that, to me, is the root of the issue of our disagreement in the United States. It's just how isolated we are and how we're not really the melting pot that we're often portrayed to be. We just are not, unless you live in an urban area where there happens to be lots of different cultures, and again, all American, I want to point that out. I take issue with identifying them as other than. We are all Americans, and we all want to provide for our families, but somehow being really frank and addressing those issues and addressing the isolation, I think is going to have to be a necessary first step.
Nice. There's a theme evolving here. Jackie, you wanted to jump in. Oops, you're muted. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. I feel somewhat sympathetic to some of the points that Rich made in his comments, but I would put it in slightly different terms. I think that before progressives can engage in meaningful cross-ideological conversations with conservatives, progressives have to develop the capacity to have conversations amongst themselves, because I think that there is a rigidity within the progressive movement that is enormously controlling and counter-effective in terms of bringing a whole new set of issues which do live in the progressive sphere into the public domain. A lot of these issues have to do with process and democracy and political reform. And in my experience, just to be very concrete about this, there's tremendous resistance within the orthodox progressive movement to process reforms that bring new voices and new players to the table. And so from where I sit, the problem is not so much bringing progressives and conservatives together for a fruitful dialogue. I think the progressive movement has to take more seriously its own resistance to open-mindedness and to conversation, and to embracing new ideas and new forces, because I actually think the progressive movement in America is very, very, very conservative, and that is a very serious problem.
Very interesting question. I mean, maybe someone from the progressive side might want to comment on that. Joan, did you have just, since maybe you have a comment on that exact point?
Well, okay. It's always interesting being called conservative as a progressive, and I live in Berkeley and have been called out as a founder of Move On as being too conservative. So I live in a cultural center point. I am at a place where I'm getting back to basics and naming things conservative, progressive. What I'm more about relationship right now, about the heart. And the heart of this matter for me is people recognizing the humanity in each other. And what drew me into doing this initially was, I have a host of friends that believe climate change is going to be the end of the world as we know it. And there's a large number of people in this country that think this is not a problem. And I wanted to understand why there was this profound difference with intelligent people on both sides. And I recognize that the living room conversations are a one step at a time kind of process. I have conversations with my conservative friends, and I find pieces of unifying common ground, and then I'm ready to move on from there. But there are so many different kinds of progressives. I know there are progressives that are rigid. I know that in the area of climate change, there are a lot of people that are panicked. And that makes it very hard for them to listen to people with different views, with views that climate change is not happening. They just think those people are being incredibly stubborn, and that's not my experience with my conservative friends. My experience with them is they have a completely different worldview, and I don't agree with it, but I know they're coming to it with from a genuine spot, and so I want to understand, and I don't think having the fight is going to get us to where we need to go. I believe that we are going to have a relationship, and then there's a chance that we will be able to get to places we never imagined we could get to.
I like that, I think, but let's just, because I think, Elisa, you wanted to mention this too, but I think that Jackie's insight into the conservatism, meaning kind of holding in the, the progressive side, I think there's something interesting there. I don't know, Elisa, just you want to build on that, and then Joan, I like your insight of like getting beyond this. You're pointing to the solutions, or Elisa.
Thank you, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but it's actually Elisa, it's Spanish.
Okay.
No worries. I'm kind of offended at the generalization of how progressives are, because let me tell you, I actually grew up in a Republican household. Cuban father, very virulently anti-communist, who actually told me that when Bill Clinton was elected president, now Fidel will be the vice president. You grew up with a lot of Republican ideology, grew up going to Catholic school, but I can tell you that from experiences moving around in this country, that beyond politics, we have a fundamental difference in how various communities are treated and how various communities do not believe that we are all American. I feel, and I never felt this more, in Miami, I thought we were all the same, that, we all worship the same, that we all, and then I moved away to this white suburb. My parents chose it because of the public school there, which was absolutely excellent, got a great education. I had a very positive experience. But one of the most shocking things that I've ever experienced in my life, in hearing people talk about and ask me questions as to what country I was from, is that I realized that they were associating American with being white. That was what an American was. And again, this particular town, a lot of fiscal conservatives, a lot of Republicans, and I was able to hear both sides. And I got to tell you that what pushed me on the progressive side was the fact that I felt that I had a home there, that there were people that looked like me that were part of the movement. It was diverse in not just, it was diverse in every way, in ethnicity, in religion, in that I just found missing in at least in the circles I was running in the Republican circles. That to say does not mean that I don't have family members that are conservative that I adore with all my life. Yes. It doesn't mean that I don't have friends that are conservative that, again, I adore and would do anything for. It's just that this worldview was developed, from those experiences, and my personal. I'm sorry, but I just cannot live somewhere where I'm the only one of my kind. I just can't do, I can't do that to my family. I have to be around what I consider the American family, people of all different backgrounds, people that are open-minded, people willing to be around people that just don't look like them also. So that's, why I kind of take issues with the, this progressive movement is monolithic, and that there's a single person that represents it or anything like that.
Well, I'm not sure that's exactly what she's saying, but anyhow, Jacob, but good thoughts on that. Jacob, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I agree with Elisa that resistance isn't a liberal issue or a conservative issue. It's really if Rich is right about the depth of the differences, it's really a human thing to feel resistance when your core feels challenged. And the way to actually dip into the experience of being challenged and work with the resistance and sit with the discomfort and be able to hear someone out is really an art and a practice that almost feels like a spiritual practice to me, akin to meditation, and it's hard. So it's hard for most people to interact across such a deep divide. So, and I'm conservative. I see that resistance in my community plenty. So, yeah.
Nice. Lowry, did you want to? We were get back to you. Sorry.
I would like to, Elisa. I think that I'm very moved by your comments, but I think your earlier comments provide a perfect solution for the problem you identify, and that is that many people live enormously isolated, and that they really that they have no opportunity to mix with other kinds of people. This is not a problem limited to one side or the other side. Everybody's limited. You go to a cocktail party, and it's really almost in Washington D.C. or New York, especially. It's almost as if the two camps are in a trance, and they're triggered by verbal cues. And you walk into a cocktail party, and you hear the cues. It only takes 3 or 4 syllables, and you know which side is your camp, and they will go into one side or the other side. The solution to this, and this goes with, I think, something common to both camps, and that is a weak concept of citizenship, where citizens really have no role. Public policy is about the government, and there's no role for citizens in this. The solution to all of it is really what Living Room Conversations does. It engages people. I work in the most tribal parts of rural India, trying to break down male dominance and to get open opportunities for girls' education. And this is a simple thing to break down. It is so easy when you engage people. We've done this in thousands and thousands of villages without opposition in a single village. When you engage people, when the girls stand up in a public meeting and ask for a chance in life, the men, you can see it in their face, they come into their bodies, they come out of their trances, and they become advocates for girls' education. There's no reason to think, my experience across almost all issues in this country that when you engage people and focus not on what they disagree about, but what they agree about, there is no issue that they can't really be brought together. And but the system institutionalizes separation. And we think that integrating schools is about busing people across town. But you go into the schools they've so-called integrated, and you see internally segregated schools because there's no effort to create a combination of incentives and leadership to engage people. Because when you engage people, all the stuff, all these so-called big differences, they all disappear.
Awesome. Debilyn, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, well, I mean, just in getting towards, you know, the solution, and I like what Lori there was saying on the idea of weak citizenship. You know, so much of our culture right now is targeted towards entertainment and keeping us divided, and, you know, beating the fear drum, and the code languages that you're talking about, Lori, is you know, you and I know we're right there with that one. And what is it going to take for us to, like, actually make citizenship cool? Because I think that is where, if we're going to use the system that we have to make a better system, how do we provide a space for people to think that engaging in citizenship is cool, and that our government is us, it's not separate from us, and work it from the system that we have to get where we want to go? Because I'm all for creating a world that has equality among people, equal opportunity, safe places to live, good schools, all the things that everybody that I ever have talked to politically want, and yet creating that future we seem to get stuck and fighting about what we need to do instead of just like, let's go create the future.
Got it. Well, we're in the nice theme here of these bigger solutions, Rich, which is nice because we've kind of identified the problem. We're moving into, or, you know, among the many, we could spend all day talking about the problem. There's some interesting bigger solutions emerging here. Richard, did you want to jump into there in that space?
Sure. One, I would like to reiterate what has already been said about the need for love and compassion, and I think it's probably a spiritual practice that we're going to have to move toward. It is very unpopular to talk about in a materialistic culture, a consumer culture, but I think that is, we're evolving to a new level, and we're really going to have to deeply care about each other. And only when we really care about each other can we really hear each other. So I thought that was a very good point, and I wanted to echo that. I think when we're imagining in the public policy realm, I work with generally more progressive clients trying to accomplish policy strategies, and I always say, so what's the win-win-win here? How can everybody win? And very often they'll just say, I don't want them to win. I want to win. And then I'll say, no, but what if everybody won, even the big business and the conservatives? And no. And so and then they say, well, that's impossible. We are such in a win-lose mindset right now that for me to win, my enemy must lose. When you play that out for a while, it becomes lose-lose. And that's where we are right now. We have to reimagine win-win-win strategies on everything that we're talking about. So how does everybody win? And that's a little bit more complex, but it's really a challenge of the imagination. And it can be done. It happens all the time. But I think we have to move toward thinking in more broad terms and say, how could the person I perceive to be as my enemy in this, how could they win? And I could win. And I think that's going to be a real breakthrough in thinking on policy issues. And I could give numerous examples in the real world where it's happened. I won't do that unless it's particularly helpful. But it can be done, and I think we have to move from win-lose thinking to win-win thinking. And that requires deep empathy and imagination of putting yourselves in the shoes and the souls of the person and getting beyond a cartoon of who you think they are.
I love it. I love it. Good thinking. Jackie, do you want to jump in?
Thanks. On the issue of love and empathy and compassion, which are values that I think the American people care deeply about, I think part of what's going on in the country right now is we are having the experience across ideological or party lines or whatever that there's no way to give expression to those values through the political system itself. And that breach or that gap is very painful. It's very painful on an emotional level. It's very painful on a moral level. I mean, I'm in New York. We just last night got, you know, the decision of the grand jury not to indict in the killing of Eric Garner here in our city, which comes several weeks after the decision in Ferguson. And I think this is a source of tremendous pain to many, many people. And yet, interestingly, just to comment on this from the progressive side, and my comment, I am a progressive, and I consider myself part of the left, broadly speaking, but the progressive solution to many of these things is to tell people to vote for the Democratic Party, even though the Democratic Party actually runs Missouri and runs New York. So that breach, that's part of the disconnect, if you will. And so I think, as I understand it, part of what we're trying to come to terms with as a country, not just as a roundtable, but as a country, is what do we do about the gap between giving expression to our moral and human values and the way the political system operates right now.
Got you. I'm really liking this. Laurie, did you want to jump in about the win-win? This win-win thing too.
Yes, I have a kind of instinct that many of the broad objectives that we seek involve integrating the left's focus on substantive objectives about the way they want society to work, with the right's focus on process, and that much of the conflict here comes from the left's focus on substance delivered mechanically by doing it instantly, by going to the government and getting a legal thing or whatever without engaging people. But the right is really understands more that real change in society happens more organically and connected to culture. Not because when I use the word culture, many people will think, well, that takes too long. It doesn't take long. In our work in rural India, where the most incredible cultural constraints are operating on men, it happens in about 15 minutes that they completely transform their attitudes. And with real engagement, and I think spiritual connection, I want to echo Rich's comments and others' comments, is crucial to this. That with spiritual connection and trust, everything becomes possible, and without it, almost nothing does.
Terrific. Elisa. Oops, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yes, I related to a lot about what Rich does in terms of, you know, what I do for work is try to influence policy, and we do that in numerous ways. The lobbying, of course, and the letters to the editors, etc. And one of the things that I've thought about, and I've developed this idea working as an organizer, is that what I've seen is that sometimes the divide isn't even between left and right. I realize it's also between the private and the public sectors. I feel that we could be all on the same page as to what we would like to see done. For example, we think that healthcare is a fundamental right. We think that workers, you know, should be able to take a paid sick day to take care of their sick child. But I often feel that the private and the public sectors are like at war with each other. And I thought Rich put it beautifully. They feel that if one wins, the other one must lose. And I just often kind of sit back and think, you know, I see a lot of symmetry here in which, for example, I look at the service industry like a Walmart. You know, lots of people work at Walmart. Wouldn't it be beneficial for a Walmart to just worry about paying their workers and then the government offer health care? You know, is there a solution in which the two sectors can come together with this ultimate goal? But instead, we have this, either anti-government or anti-corporate rhetoric that I just don't find helpful at all. But I just wanted to echo Rich on that, because I do see it. I could see creative solutions and it being a win-win for families.
Okay, on the win-win, Debilyn, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, just real quick. I mean, I think I was trying to think back when we started this whole conversation about when did I actually shift from being a win-lose thinker to being a win-win thinker. And it goes back to when I used to work in advertising and marketing, and I was a media negotiator, and so I had to work with all sorts of people across the country to get the lowest rates for my advertisers, because that was what success was measured by, was how many rating points could I buy for the dollar. And I remember coming out of a particularly troublesome negotiation where I literally threatened somebody that I would take away a $100,000 budget from them if they did not give me the rates I wanted. And I remember them leaving that meeting and just feeling sick to my stomach with how I had just treated another human being. And it was at that moment that I actually went, I have got to find a different way to do my job, a different way to measure success. Because if I can find a way that they win and I win, the advertiser wins, that is the standard by which I will now do business. And it became a win-win-win or no deal. We're not, we'll either make this work or we're not going to get to do business together, not from a threatening standpoint, but just because I was dedicated at that point to making sure that everybody was treated with respect and as a whole person. And I think that if we can figure out how to do that politically, that would be just transformational for our system.
Well, it sounds like, Joan, you have an idea on one area that might be ripe for that kind of win-win. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I co-hosted a living room conversation with the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots last year. He brought two of his friends, and I had two of my friends. Elisa was among them. And we talked about crony capitalism. And this was, I was anxious. I was dusting for a week before Mark and his friends arrived. But it ended up being this incredibly productive conversation because we found we had a huge amount that we agreed on in the area of crony capitalism. And among the things we agreed on was the criminal justice system is not working right. There are way too many people in prisons. We need to start using evidence-based practices. The war on drugs is a failure. 100% agreement. And I came out of that living room conversation really wondering what's going on with this much agreement across partisan lines. Why aren't things changing? So we've got the win-win of finding common ground. But now there's the challenge of, we found that win, how do we transform it into a win for all of our communities, and including everybody that is, trapped in this system that's not working. So it's the first part. We've got the win-win of having found that mutuality, and I think the fascinating piece is unsticking the rest of it. And it's been, a year and a half now that we are making progress in understanding what the obstacles are. You've got the criminal injustice, the criminal industrial sector, where you have private prisons, you have the prison guards union, and you have the folks that are benefiting from this. How do we change the incentives together? And the thought is that if we can work together, that which has been stuck can become unstuck. And I'm very excited about this.
That sounds awesome. Actually, Jacob, coming from your side of the spectrum, what do you make about that? And then maybe Richard, too.
I think Joan's right. I studied Prozac in my dissertation work, and I was alarmed to see how one industry could not only shape a conversation, but create this seeming consensus of an idea. I saw power creating truth, and it almost made me a liberal. Not quite. Joan is absolutely right, and these moments happen all the time when we really sit down and talk with each other. And I wanted to throw out an idea before I pass the baton. In Utah, we have a lot of Mormons running around, and we have a practice called family home evening. It's one night a week that we block out, we defend from all the busyness just for family. And it seems to me that we need to institutionalize this kind of gathering in how we live. You know, I've been talking for years about dialogue, but it wasn't until I started walking down the street to my neighbors, sitting in their living rooms, inviting them into mine, that it came alive. You know, without the practice, it remains pretty scary for people to do this. I approach people, hey, let's have a living room conversation and about gay marriage or something, and the response I get initially is fear. It's like, I don't want to debate. I don't want to get in an argument. I don't know what to say. I don't like those people. I have conservative friends who hate liberals. They just seethe with anger, and it's pretty clear they've never sat down and really heard their neighbor out. So it's just an idea that I think if we got more people just practicing this, the practice itself teaches these things, you know. So, and it's not something we can lecture people about and persuade them just by conceptual explanations. Anyway.
I like it. Well, so we've got a solution path here on potentially this prison concept, and also the bigger solution of having everyone institute your kind of weekly or your monthly, the night out. Rich, do you want to talk about you're big on the when you started this whole conversation? What do you make of that? These areas that might work short term here, even too.
I love the topics that have been mentioned, and I'm a big fan of capitalism. I'm on the right. I love social entrepreneurship, and poverty has decreased globally for the first time in the last 10 years because India and China have moved toward capitalism. I'm a huge fan of the startup culture, and so if you love capitalism, you really have to dislike crony capitalism. It's actually breaking the system. It's cheating. And if that's the way this is presented to conservatives, they will get it, and a very smart Republican leader will actually put people in jail who broke the law. Because if you believe in capitalism, nothing undermines it more than crony capitalism, the corruption that took place, where people literally took credit default swaps and put our whole nation at risk. If it's put to that way to conservatives, it'll be a winning issue. I also think on the criminal issue, that is a big social justice issue, and I wish we'd focus more on the fact that right now, if you tell me your zip code, I can almost predict your path to prison in this country. And that is not the American dream. So if it's put in those terms, we focus on Ferguson, or which happened in New York, and we have protests, but there is a structure in place right now that particularly it happens to affect largely African American and minority communities, but you're in a path that sets you up, and it's very predictable. And that's not the American dream. So the prison system right now, there's a very conservative argument, I think, against what's happening. We are now housing people at $60,000 a year. So just a financial argument that is destroying our financial system. And imagine a small portion of that invested on the other side: education, job creation. This will sound like another crazy idea right now, but I actually believe there's a conservative argument that Milton Friedman made for paying everybody a basic salary in the United States. Now that sounds quite leftist maybe, but if you think about it and you dismantled the welfare state and you actually gave people a guaranteed income where they had the dignity of planning their lives instead of government telling them what to do to get, what hoops to jump through to get into their benefits, that's another place where I could see the left and the right working together. There's a lot of places we could do it, but right now we're into a gamesmanship where we really don't want to succeed. And I was sort of stunned as someone who was pushing what you would argue are very progressive values, gay marriage, I'm fighting for AIDS funding, and yet I was attacked by the left simply because I had Republican after my name. It was amazing. So we have to get beyond these labels and look for the win-wins, and I think those are a couple of perfect examples that could happen immediately with a smart person. My guess is these will come from the right, not from the left.
Love those ideas. We're starting to chalk up all the common ground here. Jackie, you had a question, though.
Sorry. I'm wondering what we think the answer to the following question is, namely, why can't we achieve those things? Rich just said a set of things. Joan has been actually playing a leadership role on the criminal justice reform front and bringing left and right together. So there's a proliferation of solutions or new approaches or new ways of looking at these issues. So how do we understand why we can't get there from here?
Terrific question. Joan, you literally putting it into the group here. I'm just seeing Joan jump in.
The reality of human beings is it's really hard to create change. Just looking at prisons, as I started to learn about criminal justice reform, and there are really some prisons out there that have low recidivism, they have great programs, and they're not being replicated, at least not in any substantial numbers. And there is this resistance to change that seems to be innate to human beings and to the leaders of institutions. I've pretty much come to learn that in California, each prison is its own fiefdom. At least that's the way one person put it to me. So once we have the agreement, it's a big next challenge to figure out what are the levers that are going to allow us to make the change happen. And I'm sure for every different process, there are different levers. Right now, there are 3 bills in Congress that should be passed because most citizens would want them. We've been talking about the REDEEM Act, smarter sentencing, the FAIR Act. The issue of civil asset forfeiture has gotten some actual attention in the last year, and it's just outrageous that we have law enforcement shaking down American citizens around the country, particularly if they're powerless. And yet we have not been able to pass the FAIR Act. There's some very bad incentives in civil asset forfeiture, because when law enforcement can take your stuff and put it into their bank account, that's a strong incentive. The FAIR Act says you actually have to charge people, so you can't take people's stuff and then not say, okay, you can go away now, we've got your stuff. And that the money will go into the general fund, it won't go to law enforcement. That hasn't passed. And it should have passed years ago, honestly. I'm hoping that right and left together, outsiders pushing insiders will make that happen. But it's a very challenging thing. Once we found agreement, then figuring out how to get action is not trivial.
Got you. Lawrence, jump in.
One of the things that comes up a lot in conversations like this is why we don't get change. And I think that a major reason we don't get change is that people are locked into the left-right conflict in a way that keeps everybody paralyzed. My own sort of bias about this, and I think Rich's own experiences, everything he talks about is really from this playbook, I think, is that the opponents of any change hold the key to the change. That if you really care about anything, you have to convince the opponents to take a leadership role in it, because only they can unite the political culture if there's real conflict around it. There are so many examples of this in, for instance, on taxes on the rich. The first president who proposed greatly reducing taxes, high tax rates on the rich, was John Kennedy. The second seemed to be Reagan, but it was the Democrats in the House Ways and Means Committee under Rostenkowski who really promoted the major sort of elements in that. And the '86 bill was also involved, very strong Democratic involvement. Rich has mentioned the issue, the role that the libertarian right played in gay marriage, in promoting that. I think that this is, I wrote, as I said, 2 books on this subject, which went across the whole range of issues and tried to imagine what we could do if people just focused on what they agree about. And the logic of it came out of this paradoxical logic. It came out on almost every issue. You had to go to the opponent. And if you went to the opponent, there was always something in their ideology that would lend them to be for it. But the way we define things often defines the possibility of coming together as impossible. Let me give 2 examples. Here we have Obamacare. Nobody denies that there are huge problems with Obamacare, but very few people also deny that having universal health care is a crucially important thing. There is no space in the political debate on either to discuss either thing, because the issue is defined on the one side as Obamacare is perfect and wonderful and we're not going to do anything to it, and the other people are attacked for not caring about it and wanting simply to repeal it. Well, what if we just had a national conversation starting with a living room conversation on how to make Obamacare work? You know that there are serious problems about it when the process handed the whole bill to special interest groups to write this bill, and you know that the traditional crony capitalist problem emerged even on that issue when at the time of the debates on the bill, the insurers were all against the bill and in great conflict. But the New York Times last week had a front page story on how the insurers are now completely supportive of Obamacare, because you know they're right in there doing what people regulated they all do. They take over the process. Well, this is something everybody should be concerned about. It doesn't have to be done in this extreme way. Climate change. We have 2 very extreme positions. The sky is going to fall in if we don't do something about this, and the attack on the know-nothing deniers. There is no space in the middle to have a serious conversation about doing anything, and there are lots of people in the middle. But the debate is put that way, and the political class prosper from this. There are real examples of the extent to which they won't tolerate people talking to each other. And the media, of course, who are in the entertainment business and think only conflict gets the best ratings, and they're probably right about that, are driving all of this. So really, the question is how to break through all of this. And I think it does come back to living room conversations on a huge scale, with major theatrical figures breaking from the trance that people are in on both sides and actually forcing real engagement on real problems before people.
Gotcha. So Jackie's original question was what's getting in the way here? Elisa, you had an idea about that, and then we'll go to Rich.
Yes, so I have an entrepreneurship background. I actually moved out blindly to San Francisco with my husband to work at a .com, and we started various ventures. So that's my background, and I have to say the most frustrating aspect of my job, this is my first time working at a nonprofit, is how slow policy works. Just to move one tiny little piece, never mind a huge bill like Obamacare. I'm talking it could be something as simple as passing a soda tax in Berkeley, California. Just a little tiny thing. And that is, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars at least. No, I'm sorry, millions of dollars poured in. You're talking just a lot of lobbying from both sides and advertisement and air wars. And it is just moving any kind of policy, never mind for a big issue like healthcare and climate change, is a lot. Step one, you need to create a groundswell of movement, grassroots. You need to let people know that this problem exists and get them on board, get all the players on board. I think that the soda tax, for example, in Berkeley was able to pass because we had the churches on board, we had all these various community groups on board, we had grassroots support. Basically, we were able to get small business owners supported it. We were able to get the support before the soda industry got to people. So that's how, just to move this little, just to give you an example, this one little piece of legislation, what is involved on it. So big time reform, you're looking at everything from labor unions to business owners to insurance companies to, so it's a matter of, and again, me by myself does not have all the solution, which is why I'm grateful to have all these great minds on board, but we can have these great ideas, but the follow-up to it is very, very hard. And I say this as an organizer who's always trying to push some kind of policy or the other. And the number one pushback I get is, well, why don't you do this instead? I'm like, geez, that's just another $3 million to get my ad on the air or to, you know, do lobbying or to, I mean, seriously, one thing at a time.
Gotcha. Rich.
Yeah, just to give some concrete examples, I do think the strategy of picking the entity in the stakeholder who has the most to lose or you feel is the most opposed, engaging them first has worked very well. Concrete example was in the 90s, Congress was taken over by Republicans. AIDS activists have no access to the Congress now. They've built no bridges. And so their fear is that Ryan White and other AIDS programs are going to be defunded at a time when we didn't really have breakthrough drugs. And we went and met with the most conservative member of the Congress, a doctor, Tom Coburn, who later went on to become Senator Coburn, from Oklahoma, anti-gay, but he was a doctor. And we explained the cause to him. Long story short, he goes to the well of the House and asks for more money in the AIDS budget than President Clinton. A week later, President Clinton changes his numbers. He was not going to be more conservative on funding AIDS than Tom Coburn. So you can flip the dynamic. When we did AIDS in Africa, the first groups we reached out to in putting the coalition together were evangelical Christians, not necessarily a group you'd think would be natural for me, and the pharmaceutical industry that has huge ties into Washington and financial ties to Washington. But it's also a market for them, to be blunt. So then we went to the military community and talked about the military crisis that would happen. These are three groups you would never imagine leading social change: evangelical Christians, the drug companies, and the military. But that's why the AIDS strategy in Africa worked. So, but my experience when I work with progressive groups, they generally want to start with the left, pick the most left-wing member of Congress to initiate the bill. And once they do that, I can promise you, in this environment, no Republican will sign on to that bill. They can't. They will lose in their primary. So the secret is find the person at the most extreme side. Now this could work the other way too. If you were pushing something that was very conservative but you wanted to win over on a left issue, you want to put the most liberal member to get on first. But usually the strategy on progressive causes goes left to right, and that's why it fails. And in my experience, I never had a lot of money in what I did. I didn't have a lot of grassroots. You could pick 5 or 6 people who control things, believe it or not, in Washington on certain committees who have the leverage. And if you get them on board, everybody else says, oh my gosh, if they're on it. You know, I did education reform and started with conservative Republicans. Senator Kennedy's office, rather than saying, oh my gosh, you've got Republicans on it, said, my gosh, you've got Republicans on it, great, we can move on this, I'll work right on it. And he moved the bill right through. So I think those are some of the solutions, and that's, I think, why we're not moving forward too. We mentioned healthcare. I think the immigration strategy by the Obama administration and the healthcare strategy, which is very left to right, are actually going to backfire. And I just saw, sadly, that a poll among Republicans that support for immigration has dramatically decreased. So that partisan factor just kicked in. Now and that's going to set us back, I think, on the issue. I know that progressives are excited about these two things, but I think long-term they're actually short-term victories for progressives, but long-term losers for those issues. I think we could have done it in a different way.
Really savvy insights there, Rich. Thanks. Jackie, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I have a slightly different set of experiences that come from the kinds of reform issues that I work on, which are political reform and structural reform issues. We start out in a situation where, for example, it just happened in Oregon, where we had an initiative on the ballot for nonpartisan primaries, where the Democratic and Republican parties, normally opposed on all ballot measures, were together in opposition to this democracy reform, basically, which would have, changed the structure of the election system so that about 32% of the electorate who were independents could participate in every round. So right from the start, you find yourself in a situation where the traditional players who are normally opposed on any set of issues, and you have to figure out, as others have said, do you go to the right first or you go to the left first, and how do you, pressure and leverage along ideological lines. Here was a situation where both parties were against you, and what you had to do was simultaneously peel away, pro-democracy elements, if you will, from within both the Democratic and Republican parties, but at the same time you had to find a way to organize and empower new constituencies like independents, right, who are normally not at the table in these kinds of things, but who have the potential to drive nonpartisan reform because, among other things, it's very much in their interests relative to being able to participate fully in the political process. So this is kind of an interesting, in a way, it's sort of a new paradigm kind of situation. And at one point during the campaign, I was listening to a radio show on Oregon Public Broadcasting, which on the one hand had people on who were really, really worked up about the fact that two billionaires, Mike Bloomberg and John Arnold, had given money to the Yes on 90 campaign, and that automatically made it bad because if the business community is supporting bad, which of course is not true. But one of the things that they said on this broadcast was, well, we don't really know what category to put this thing in, because normally labor and capital are on opposite sides. But in this situation, you have some of capital and some of labor on one side and some of capital and some of labor on the other side. So just the experience of scuttling the conventional wisdom, I think, was actually growthful, even though we lost. Getting the initiative passed this go-round. But it's at the very early stages of carving out a new kind of coalition. So that's some of the experience that I've had with these kinds of issues.
Very interesting. I know in California here, we did have some movement in that, which helped the elections in the kind of a nonpartisan way, and some redistricting too that's helped things too. So there is hope, I think, on more fundamental political reform. Joan, you had some thoughts on that.
One of the interesting things about this conversation is we're going to political strategy in many cases, D.C. strategy, Oregon strategy, and I think it's worthwhile to look at this reinventing, healing the heart of democracy at the level of the average citizen level, where it's really about the grassroots sentiment. And because I'm a founder of Move On, perhaps, and Moms Rising, it's average citizens where really have my heart. And I always quote the FDR, "You've convinced me, now make me do it," that in fact our leaders should be responding to the citizens first and foremost. And my dream tends to be for a huge citizen movement that pushes the politicians, and I think we need to be working on all levels though, because there are DC strategies we need to be paying attention to, and state strategies. But I think it's worth thinking about how there are inside and outside groups and strategies, and that these small conversations that we're trying to encourage people to have are something that's tiny in that it's 6 people, but it's massively reproducible. So if we have a Goldilocks moment, you could have 100,000 conversations on an issue and then give support to leaders on both sides to lead with that foundation of solid citizen, transpartisan agreement behind them. That's the dream that I aspire to, with many awesome partners.
Wonderful. Well, that's a great kind of setup here for what is unfortunately we got to start winding up the session here. And so it's been a really interesting conversation. But we are going to go around to everyone with some last thoughts on what they saw as, what we learned, what we accomplished maybe here, and also what they'd like to see happen next in terms of moving this issue forward. We were talking throughout the whole conversation about not just the problem, but a lot of really interesting solutions. I was really heartened, actually, by how many interesting ideas out there about how we can actually move the ball ahead. So why don't we go around the table and get everyone's final words, and we're going to end with our two anchors, Jacob and Joan, at the end. But Deb, do you want to kind of start off with your kind of tying this up a little bit? And take a good chunk of time there, just a good minute or so.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody. I am just so inspired by being here today and having a great conversation. And I want to just kind of tag on to what Joan was just talking about, because it is, one of the things that we have right now that we are working on addressing in this conversation is actually catching people's attention. And, all of us are in the game. We like doing this work. We like civic engagement. We like, helping draft policy. But the average person doesn't. And so part of this, the question that I'm kind of leaving with today is, like, how do we make all of this interesting so that people actually want to engage as citizens and they want to care about what's happening at the government political level in their community and nationally. And I just think that is going to be a key question on helping this spread like wildfire. And I know the living room conversations process works. It is so incredibly connecting for people, and it's hard to describe it because it's experiential. So I'll leave us all with that. Thank you very much. Debilyn with Coffee Party USA out.
Not out yet. Not out yet. We're still in the conversation here. Lowry, how about some thoughts about what you think is going on here? Oops, you're muted.
God, I'm so sorry. Oh, there. Does that work? Yeah. I think one of the basic values that is a source of conflict in the country is the left's focus on equality, because it turns almost every situation into a win-lose, and it turns everybody into worrying about whether they're going to win or lose around one thing. We have found, and I believe, that if we focused on empowerment of everyone, it would not be seen as a zero-sum game, that everybody could be empowered. Both the left and the right, in effect, have a concept of the American dream. The right is that people from the poor will rise and become rich. And the left has the idea somehow that in a really just system, everybody could be above average. The question is, why can't we have a system where the people who have terrible disadvantages can't also realize the American dream? Why can't they also be honored and engaged and so on by everyone? And I think that my program in India, working among the poorest people in the world, is a perfect, powerful example of how that might work. I'm working on a book with a celebrated educator in the San Francisco Unified School District in the poorest section of the city, which shows how it can work in the U.S. And a lot of it has to do with creating a sense of ownership and stakeholding and having a stake in things that is a source of caring. Anyway, that's my view of these things.
Nice thoughts. Jackie, so again, we're thinking about here what's emerging here that really struck out to you, and then what you'd like to see happening next to move this ball forward in this issue. Any thoughts on that?
I do. I was thinking that it seems to me that the conversation that we've been having reveals a sort of a conflict that we face as organizers and leaders. And here's how I would describe the conflict. Maybe others would describe it differently. I think it's the conflict between whether the approach is to try to find common ground from within the existing paradigms, or whether the approach is to find ways to bring people together to create new things. And that, it's a complicated question, and on any given day, you know, I go back and forth between the two. You know, both at a practical level, at an action level, but also at a thought level and at a philosophical level or whatever. But I think that's an important question, and I really value the conversation that we've had, because I think we're trying to talk about that even while we're talking about different issues, whether it's immigration or economic development or poverty or criminal justice and all of these things, which we could talk endlessly about. I think we're also talking about what's the methodology for getting out of the box that we're trapped in. And so I value this conversation, and as part of that, I just want to thank you for including me.
And thank you. You've had a lot of thoughtful comments. Rich, you were kind of at those bigger breakthrough methodologies. Any thoughts on what you thought we accomplished and where to go next?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on the idea of how do we engage citizens and kind of make this cool? How do we get the grassroots involved? What I've seen that's a very exciting model in the social entrepreneur field is I do competitions where you discover the best models, you celebrate them, then you train them, and then you find investment for them. It's very exciting, gets a lot of people engaged, hundreds of people join the webinars, and it's very popular, particularly among millennials. I'm working with the National Institute for Civil Discourse to emulate that model for political entrepreneurs. Let's find the best creative political reform ideas from the grassroots. Let's have lots of webinars where we train people on these topics. Let's find the best, let's train the best, and then let's fund the best ideas. And so that's a real way of, I think, getting people excited that they would actually see something very tangible at the end, a solution that worked, that got celebrated. So that's something that I'll be working on over the next year or so.
Love it. Good idea. Elisa.
Yes, hi. Well, thank you for having me on. It's an honor. And I have to say that I think that engagement is key. Whenever I hear about sort of the fighting between left and right, I often have to sit back and remind myself that we're actually a non-voting country. Something like over 30% of people in many states, if not, it might be even an average in the country, actually go out and vote in the midterm elections. That's really low and not a good thing, because it's kind of showing that we're taking this precious right of the vote and letting our voices known for granted. What I love about this model with the living room conversations is just basic engagement with people, and I agree that it has to start in the grassroots. Maybe have the churches on the ground, they're very well organized, start these kinds of conversations. The local community groups, high schools, I could see this doing, I mean, I'm a debater, so I could totally have seen myself participate in something like this if it had been available to me in high school. So I think this gives me hope. I'm glad that this tool is out there, and it's a matter of connecting it with people on the ground.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Jacob.
Laurie's language of the win-win really stood out to me. I'm struck at how much optimism there is in this work, and the contrast with how much despair there is about politics. It almost makes me want to put on my missionary name tag and start going door to door and say, are you despairing about the political system? Well, I've got a message. You know, it almost feels like something that can immediately bring some hope. Right down the street, knock on your neighbor's door, and let's try this. And I also think rebranding this whole thing is important. The Village Square in Tallahassee talks about dialogue as fun, entertaining, social. I think Americans are going to need that to do it as well.
That's great. Love the optimism. Joan. Joan, you gonna unmute there?
Can you unmute her?
Is it working now?
Yeah.
Good. All right. It's been wonderful hearing what everyone has to say. I think trying all sorts of things is key, and that it's going to be a multifaceted effort to kind of restore our civil space so that our expectation is respect when we are in communication in our communities, and even what our media and our leadership shows. We need to start demonstrating that we can have respectful engagement at all levels. And Living Room Conversations is an open source project. So we're going to be evolving and listening to what people do and how to make them better. And I think we're going to develop Living Room Conversations Lite, because it's true, people are intimidated to do this right now. So we want to have some games, some apps to make it, let people just dip their toes in and discover how exciting and fun it is to talk to people that have different viewpoints, because it's exciting and it is open-hearted. It's a good thing for our community, small and large. So I'm lucky to be working with many of the people that are at this round table, and very fun to get you all together. Some of you have not met in person yet, and I look forward to that happening one of these days. Thank you so much for inviting us to have a round table. This has been a great experience.
Well, it's fantastic to have you here, Joan, and the whole group. And in fact, now we have met, because it is over virtual. It's about as close as you can get besides the group hug. And so, anyhow, fantastic conversation. It left me very heartened and very hopeful that there is ways forward. A lot of great ideas here. We'll be doing an edited version, about a 10-minute version of the recap, the best ideas there, a tighter, even shorter kind of trailer you can push through social media, write-ups on the best stuff. And so do come back in the next couple of days. We'll have that. And you got a lot of work ahead, but there's a way forward. So thank you for everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.